Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of the seminar series, Tiered Preparedness and Response. In this series, OSRL experts and SMEs discuss the different wedges that make up the TPR wheel. And today we'll hear about surveillance modeling and visualization. And we're joined today by Simon Blean, who's the geomatics supervisor, and by Simon McCosh, who's aviation liaison. If you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, please type them into the chat and we'll take them at the end. And this session will be recorded and available on our website in the technical library. So with that, I'll just pass over to Simon McCosh.
Thanks, Mandy. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome, as Mandy says, to the Surveillance and Modelling Visualisation session. Quick introduction from myself. I've worked for oil spill response for about 13 years now, which is quite scary. My current role, I'm the aviation liaison officer, and that role entails supporting the aviation team in providing all the OSRL aviation services, managing the contracts, and also looking outreach into different providers and looking at obviously new technology that may be of use to our members in combating oil spills. I'll pass over to Simon for his introduction.
Sure. Hi there, everyone. I'm also Simon. I'm the geomatics supervisor at OSRL. So that means I look after a lot of the oil spill modelling and mapping work that we do, both in response and in planning and preparedness activities, so a combination of the two.
Thanks, Simon. So yeah, two Simons on the presentation. We'll try not to make that too confusing. We're not quite Simon and Garfunkel, but we'll do our best to entertain you nonetheless. As Mandy said, this is part of the tiered preparedness and response sessions. So using the TPR wheel, as you can see here. I'm not going into this too much. Andy Nicol has presented a previous presentation on this TPR wheel, and that's available from the Oil Spill Response website, and we'll provide a link for that for all attendees. So I think there's about 15 sessions, so really useful sessions. Let's say the videos are going to be recorded, so you can dip in and out of those sessions and videos as you see fit. So moving on to surveillance then. So what is surveillance? Well, surveillance is a number of different strategies that we use to help us visualise, detect, locate oil spills in the event of a response. And that's got quite a few different aspects, which we'll be going into now in an overview and as much detail as I can. As you can appreciate, they're quite big subjects, but we're going to do our best in the next 20 or 30 minutes or so to give you a good overview of those services and strategies. So we'll start off with satellite imagery then. This is a service or a strategy that we use usually in the early stages of a response, particularly if it's maybe at night, and we can use this service in the evening, in the night time. It doesn't require sunlight to provide the information, the data that we need. It's also useful for remote locations as well, and it covers a wide area, as we'll talk about. So synthetic aperture radar is the sensor we use, SAR, and this basically it uses microwaves, and it sends those out from the satellite. That hits the sea surface, bounces off, and comes back to the satellite, and detects subtle changes in the surface of the sea. As you can imagine, if there's oil on the water, it has a dampening effect on the sea surface, and the SAR sensor picks this up, and then we can use that to give us a fairly good indication if there's oil on the sea surface. So satellite images, they do not replace the need for aerial surveillance. So that's going up in an aircraft or using UAVs, but it does provide good guidance to guide those aerial surveillance missions and taskings, and that in turn will help us to verify the trajectory modelling as well. And we can use that information to go backfeed it into the modelling and improve the accuracy of that modelling as well. So what are the advantages of satellite imagery? Well, as I mentioned, it provides a really good wide coverage area. You know, a 500 to 500 kilometre search area, so that's around about 250,000 square kilometres. So, you know, really useful, a good wide area of coverage. As I mentioned, it's not limited by light levels. It's also not limited by cloud cover or precipitation. So, you know, quite useful. Some of the aerial surveillance sensors, they can only be used in daylight. So, as I said, quite a useful aspect to surveying and looking for oil spills. It provides GSI products, so that's shape files and KMZ files that we can overlay into a common operating picture within the EOC or IMT, so that we can then feed into the incident action plan as well. So a really good GIS tool, I'll say, and Simon will go into that in a bit more detail in his presentation of how we can use that data and present it in a usable format. Satellite imagery is a proven technology. It's widely accepted and understood. And we, you know, in responses, oil spill response, you know, use it quite a lot to support our members. So, you know, it's a really good tool. It does have disadvantages. It doesn't really discriminate between thick or thin oil, so you still require that aerial surveillance aspect going up in the plane and getting you know, trained eyes on the spill. The ideal conditions for satellite imagery, that's wind speeds between 3 meters per second and 12 meters per second. It needs a little bit of wave energy, but not too much to get that differentiation between the different sea levels and sea surface. It does require interpretation by a skilled analyst. We obviously, when we task the satellite, it needs to get in position. It needs to be able to process that and interpret the images. So we need a trained operator to do that, and they produce a report, which I'll show you in a minute, which gives a confidence rating in whether there's oil at sea. The imagery can be prone to false positives. Other things that may dampen the sea, such as wind shadows, rain and seaweed, can give you false positives, and that's why we really need a skilled analyst to look at those, to look at the data coming back and give us an indication or confidence level in whether that's oil or not. Another disadvantage is cost. It can be quite costly, but you know, if the service works, then it's a really good tool, as I've said. So if we look on the right hand side here to this image of an area in the Caspian, this is a sort of image that we could get back from satellite, so you can see a wide area of coverage, and then you can see some different coloured numbered aspects within the satellite image, and then that transfers onto different confidence levels. So you can see by the red, that gives a high probability of the incidence of oil, and then you move down to the amber or orange sections, and that gives a medium possibility, and then into the yellow areas, that's a low possibility. And then also it gives you the location, the area of the spill, and also gives you some wind data as well, so that helps to feed into the modelling. So as I said, a really useful tool. So moving on to aerial surveillance then. So aerial surveillance, when it's conducted by a trained observer, is really one of the most effective methods we have of interpreting the size and the behaviour of oils at sea. So the main aims of the mission, obviously to reduce false positives, to confirm if there's oil or no oil at sea, and hopefully to locate the source as well if required by the responsible party. It helps us to locate all the slicks. We can accurately describe the slicks, their appearance. We can get a good idea of their volume and also their trajectory. And again, that can feed into the modelling, which Simon will talk about later. It can also capture evidential data, so photography, video footage, infrared and UV sensor data, if it's available on those aircraft. All these different aspects go to help build up that picture of the slick and the spill, and then of course that feeds into your operational response actions. So as I said, that information provides accurate situational awareness to the IMT and also regulators as well, and that allows informed decision making and the effective use of response sources. At the right hand side here, you can see these are some of the images that are produced by the OSRL's UKCS aircraft. So you can see there's a turret, wide range of sensors there. Provides video footage. In this image here, so that's obviously a photograph, and then we move on to a UV image, and then an IR image. So these images, when they're taken at the same time, in respect of an oil spill or a slick, can really give you a good, accurate picture of the slick and its trajectory. So moving on to unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, they've got a couple of different applications, sort of shoreline and offshore application. So offshore, it helps to improve encounter rates and the treatment of oil by targeting the thickest areas of the oil. So if I blow up that image, as you can see here, quite a large oil slick, and within that oil slick, it's got thicker edges, and then not so thicker edges, sort of thinner edges here, and also gaps of fairly clean sea. And as you can see here, we've got vessel resources working within that spill to try and capture the oil and respond to it. So using a UAV off of one of these vessels is quite an effective method, and a cost-effective method as well, of providing information to those vessels to combat the thickest areas of the slick. So, really effective use of resources. So again, they can use infrared, UV and visual imaging sensors. They don't tend to be quite so good as the ones that you get in aircraft, and that's because obviously the size of the UAV and its payload reduces the size of these sensors. But still, at the levels they fly, between 20 and 30 meters, it's still very useful. So monitoring the effectiveness of response operations, which I've already talked about. They can also be used for salvage, offshore installation support. We're seeing a lot more members now utilising UAVs for offshore installation surveys, and as the technology improves, they're becoming more and more useful. So offshore, we can also use them for wildlife surveying. In a spill, we can monitor offshore bird populations and see the effects, if any, of the oil spills at sea. Moving on to shoreline application, they can support SCAT shoreline assessments and segmentation, especially in remote areas or locations that may be unsafe or inaccessible. And we've seen that on a number of responses. They can be really useful in those areas. They can also help with booming plans, identifying places where they can place protection and containment booms. Again, making effective use of the resources that are available to the operations. Again, you can use them for wildlife surveying onshore as well. The disadvantages and advantages. So the UAV enables you to get rapid data acquisition during the first sort of stages of a response, and that helps to identify high priority, heavy oiled areas, and again, supports efficient use of the operational resources in those areas, especially in the early stages of response where you may have limited resources. It really helps to identify those high priority areas. So it's a quick and efficient method of obtaining, site specific low level photography. They tend to work in the 20 to 30 meter range, and as a result, the high resolution imagery is pretty good, especially when you compare to a manned aircraft that has obviously height limitations and they can't come down quite as low for safety reasons. So we mentioned it's a tool we can use to create a map which can be attached to an STR, a shoreline treatment recommendation document, and then that can be part of the incident action plan for operational support. It does have its disadvantages. Flight permissions, they're differing depending on where you are in the globe, and they can be quite complicated, and they can take quite some time to get those flight permits and clearances in place. So I think as time moves on, the technology improves and the regulation catches up with it. I think that, you know, it just makes UAVs more and more useful. There is some restrictions around spare lithium batteries. They can only be really transported by sea, so that can have some limiting factors. We tend to try and find providers in country of the spill, or near to the country of spill, so that obviously limits the need to transport the UAVs by air, which can be, as I say, can be quite difficult. Battery durations, those are limitations. It tends to sort of range from around about 15 minutes up to an hour on some UAVs, but technology is improving, as I said, all the time, and hopefully those battery duration times will improve. Professional unmanned aerial systems can have higher costs, but when you compare it to manned aircraft, it's still you know, a lot cheaper. Due to sensor size, I've mentioned quality can be reduced a little bit compared to a manned aircraft, but you know, you have to offset the advantages and disadvantages of both strategies. So safety then, obviously very important, safety, your number one priority. So obviously if you use an aircraft, make sure they're airworthy and compliant with internal country guidelines. For OSL aviation resources, obviously they're audited quite heavily, and we're well aware of the regulations and the airworthiness of the aircraft that we use. However, when you move into different areas, remote areas for responses, different countries, you obviously have to, you know, look at those aircraft that you're using, because you have no real previous knowledge of the provider or those aircraft. And internally we do that by using an aircraft of opportunity checklist. So an example of that on the right hand side. So this is a document we use to look at the aircraft that we want to use in other countries and remote locations. And basically it's a risk assessment really. We look at all a number of different areas: nature of operation, the aviation authority, the certification of the operator, etc. And we assess the risk, working with the client or the member in country, and then we decide whether we want to go ahead and use that aircraft. So there's definitely something to think about. Say working in remote locations in different countries, you've got no prior knowledge. You need to ensure you've got the correct training. An example of that is the BOSIA certification that's required for offshore helicopter use. Just being aware of what's required, and giving people the best training that you can to enable them to use those assets. Deconfliction of assets is something that's really important. If you've got a spill, especially in the early stages, and you've got multiple agencies with multiple aircraft, it's really important to communicate with those providers and make sure that we're all deconflicting our assets. That also applies to UAVs. We tend to find, at the moment with the legislation, you can't have UAVs entering into aircraft airspace. But also, if you are using both, you need to make sure that they are deconflicted and only working in their areas of operation. So ensure UAV operators, pilots are competent. The UK must register a UAS operator with the CAA. So again, it's ensuring what's required in country and making sure we're being as safe as possible in using those UAV assets. So future developments, as I mentioned before, increased accessibility to larger UAVs as the costs reduce and the legislation allows greater flexibility of their use. An example of that is down there on the left hand side. So this is a recent UAV demonstration that we went to in Wales in the UK. As you see, that's quite a large UAV. I think the wingspan was about 16.5 meters. And I believe the provider can has access to a 26.5 metre UAV, so really large. Use is quite restricted. To actually use this in the UK, we had to get special information from the CAA, but it was quite impressive. And I think as the technology improves and the costs come down in the future, this is something we could definitely utilise. And that was provided by 2XL, who's the contractor for our 727 and UKCS aviation services. Artificial intelligence, AI advances. So you can see an example of that on the right hand side. So this is sensors and software that can recognise different types of materials on shorelines, such as plastic, wood, etc. This is something we're looking into with the hope that we can possibly use it in future spills on shorelines. Maybe it'll be able to detect oil. We also looking at different aspects of different spills. We've been to different spills where we've not only been looking for oil, but we've also been looking for plastics as well. So this technology will be really useful, I think, as we move forward. One other aspect of future developments, we're investigating access to aircraft with a greater range of gas sensors. So in some gas spills and gas releases, we would like to look at aircraft that have got availability of different types of sensors, obviously to support our members if they did have a large condensate gas leak. This is something we may be able to use to detect the plume and detect the size and obviously zones that we may need to fend off in the event of a spill. So that's it from me. I'm not sure if there's any questions up to this point, Mandy, or if you want to leave them to the end.
Well, we do have one actually that came in from Ingrid, and she has a question about the Shetland base. Is the UAV available at the base in Shalloway, Shetland? And if not, how close is the nearest UAV, and how soon would it be transported to Shetland?
As far as I'm aware, we're not aware of a UAV provider in Shetland. We've got a couple of providers that we have MOUs with in the UK. So that's Terra Drone and Sky Futures. We work quite closely with them and use them on exercises. So I'd imagine they could get to the Shetlands, you know, within at least in a day or two. I couldn't give you an exact time on that because I was obviously need to see the area of operation, see where their operators are. But I can certainly go back to them and get a good idea of how quickly they respond. They are very keen. We had a recent response in the UK, and they were very quick. Terra Drone were very quick to provide us with the initial information that we needed to allow them to respond. We didn't use them in the end, but we were quite impressed with the speed of their response to us and providing the information that we need to use them in the field.
Great. Okay, thanks. And there is one more. This is a great question. There's question within the questions, but it says in the presentation you stated that the aerial surveillance is a more effective method to determine size and spill behavior at sea. So why do some operators rely heavily on trajectory data when aerial surveillance is better? And then how do we share this technical information as an advantage across the industry?
I think from a start, aerial surveillance, provided you've got a good trained operator, sensor operator within the plane who's trained, has the experience as well. That's something we find is really useful to have the experience of oil spills. Actually getting eyes on the spill is really useful. You can use obviously the photography, the video, the UV data and the IR data, which is very useful. But it goes to make up a bigger picture, and the opinion of the trained observer tends to shape all that information into, a fairly accurate picture of the spill, its appearance, its volume, and its trajectory. So it's not one single piece of data. It's using all those pieces of data. Simon will talk about the modelling in a minute. I don't want to steal his thunder, but it's about using all those assets if we can, and the member wants us to bring that data together and give us a good overall picture of the behaviour and what the slick's actually doing. Sorry, Mandy, what was the last part of the question?
And how do we share this with the rest of the industry? How can we share this technical information as an advantage across the industry?
I think obviously by outreach, we've always, as an organisation, we've always talked to our members within our training courses about the importance of aerial surveillance. It can be difficult, in remote locations with limited infrastructure. Having an aircraft with UV, IR, and photography sensors is not, always available, and we have to rely just solely on the trained observer within the aircraft. So this is something we try and train member personnel if they're in crew change helicopters to help them look at spills and quantify them if needs be. And then in a spill, we'd obviously try and get a trained observer in country and in that aircraft to supplement the information and data coming back. So that information and data, I won't go into it too much because Simon's going to talk about visualization, and so again, I don't want to steal his thunder, but it's all about building that common operating picture, bringing in all that data in, and making sure it's in a useful format. And that's how I won't go into it too much. I will. Simon won't be happy if I steal his thunder. But thanks. That's a really good question, and I hope I've answered it. But yeah, if you've got any more questions, feed it into the chat, and we can always talk through them at the end.
Great, thanks, Simon.
Right then, hi everyone again. On to the modelling section next. Before I do start on that, I just had one further thought on that last question that Simon was talking about sharing technical information across industry. To me, one of the most powerful sort of ways of communicating things like that is through what's happened previously in case studies. A lot of time, information about oil spills is quite private, kept quite close to the sort of organisations, and a willingness and ability to share that out to sort of other sort of people in the area and learn from what's happened previously is a really powerful way of getting that sort of message out there about what's been effective previously and why we should do things certain ways and not other ways. But yes, on to the modelling side now. So this is another part of that sort of capability within that SMV wedge. There's two types of modelling that is sort of can be considered during a response. Just go to the next slide, please, Simon. There we go. So there's the modelling that will be done during the response itself. But there's also modelling that might be done in the planning and preparation stages well before an oil spill has happened, and some of the information from that can also be useful to us during a response. So we're going to look a little bit at that as well. Moving on to the next slide then, please, Simon. So starting off with the modelling that we'd actually do during the spill itself and how that's going to help us. The way we do this modelling is we first of all start gathering the basic information as much as we know about the spill in terms of what's happened, so where the spill has occurred from, what time and date it happened at, how much oil, what type of oil, those sorts of details, and we combine that with information on the predicted environmental conditions over the coming days, so what the winds, the currents, the sea temperature. And we combine both those sort of sets of data together and add it all into our oil spill modelling software, which can then run a whole series of calculations a lot faster than you can do by hand. And the output of that is a a short range prediction on how that oil spill is going to behave and evolve over the coming days. Normally up to about 5 days ahead we will be forecasting. If you just play the video please, Simon. So this will show us how the oil spill is, where it's going to move to, how that's going to travel. So in the video here you can see the oil tracking northwards over that 5-day period. But as well as the movement of it, it will also predict details such as, is the oil going to emulsify? Is it how much is going to evaporate? Is it going to disperse? Is it going to hit a shoreline? Those sorts of details, giving us a good idea on how it's going to behave, and then we can pass that information to other parts of the response so they can start acting upon that and putting together plans to deal with this possible situation. So for example, we could pass this to the surveillance team and they can task the aircraft to search the area where they think the oil is going to be and give them the best chance of coming into contact with it. If it's going to cross a maritime boundary, then we might want to inform the neighbouring coast guard of that country that the oil is potentially heading their way. Or if it was going to hit a shoreline, then we could think about standing up a shoreline response team at that area to be ready for if the oil does come ashore at that location. In order for this to be useful and relevant information, we need to make sure we can deliver these modelling results quickly. The longer we wait, the less relevant it's going to become. And so at OSRL, we've got modelers embedded in both our response teams in Southampton and in Singapore, and within about 2 to 3 hours of receiving all the information that they need to get these models running, they can have that sort of model turned around and results available to everyone. It is worth mentioning with any sort of modelling, but this sort of type of modelling in particular, that it is only a prediction. It is not 100% accurate, it's not perfect, and there are occasions where the modelling doesn't match what we actually see going on, which is why it's really important to back up any modelling with surveillance opportunities as often as possible, really. And once we do get verification from that surveillance, then they can feed that back to the model to be updated and revised, and then we can help us produce better modelling for the subsequent round of modelling and surveillance that will come across the response. If you, next slide please, Simon. So the other type of modelling that I mentioned there before was the modelling that is done well before a spill occurs, whilst putting together an oil spill contingency plan or a document like that. And we use the same oil spill models to do this modelling, but we use a slightly different technique here called stochastic or probabilistic modelling. And the way this works is we first of all define our release scenario that we're going to model. So an oil spill that we think might happen. So whether that's something like a worst case well blowout, or the total inventory of a fuel tank. And we run that same oil spill scenario through the model hundreds of times over, each time experiencing different environmental conditions, so different winds, different currents that we take from a historic data set spanning several years. So we get a really good range of possible different outcomes that this oil spill could take. And from that big stack of different outcomes, we can then do a whole series of analysis and produce some stats on that help us answer questions like, what is the possible range of impact of this spill? What's a more likely outcome that's going to happen? Where's the oil most likely to travel? What is a particularly bad outcome look like? What's a good outcome look like? As well as producing maps like you see on the right hand side here, which do need a little bit of careful interpretation, because this isn't showing us the impact of any one oil spill. This is an amalgamation of those hundreds of spills, all combined together, and then this is showing us the probability that any one area could be impacted by that spill. In order to do all this, it obviously takes a lot longer than it does for response modelling. So we're talking about weeks rather than hours to put together a modelling project like this. So it's not normally something that's done during the spill, but if it's available to us beforehand, and particularly if the release scenario matches the spill that we're actually working with, then it can still be a very relevant tool that can give us some good information. Right, so that's a bit of an overview of the modelling. If you could go on to the next bit, please, Simon. So moving on to visualisation, which is kind of the element that ties both the surveillance and the modelling together before it's fed out. On to the next slide again, please. So in just about any oil spill response, particularly in the command centre, you can have information coming in from tens, if not hundreds of different sources, all coming in at once. It can get really quite busy. Lots of different information coming in into different people in that command centre will be finding different bits of those information useful, and it can get quite overwhelming and lead you to the sort of question where you're going, what is going on with this incident? There's a lot happening, and what visualization does is tries to distill that information down and make sense of all that information coming in, make it understood, known about, accessible to people, and once many people know about the information, then we can start working with it and putting together a good response. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Simon. Just again, please. There we go. So visualization at a very basic level, it can be as complex or as simple as the situation demands, but at a very basic level can be writing some information up on a whiteboard. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. It's taking that information from someone's head, from a laptop screen, up onto somewhere where everybody in the room can start to understand what's there and work with it. Quite often it takes a form of some sort of map. And Google Earth is quite a good tool for quite simple visualization tasks in small spills. Putting a few dots on a map really starts to sort of show how all that information fits together well. In larger, more complicated spills, though, a tool like that can get overwhelmed very quickly, and that image on the bottom left there shows just how much information can get built up in really quite a short amount of time, to the point where the map is so busy that it's not really helpful or useful to anybody. They're going to struggle to get the information that they need out of it. In the past few years as well, we've been doing a lot of work developing online maps and dashboards, which can be accessed by a range of people in multiple locations around different centres, all working off the same up-to-date source of information. And one of the most successful tools we've had is our shoreline survey tool, which allows responders that are surveying the shoreline to feed back their results in real time. So as they're walking along the beach, they can report back their position, they can take some photos of what they're seeing, send that back, and then that uploads onto the site, and people in the command centre can start understanding and working with that information in real time without needing to wait for the team to get back and write a report, upload their photos. It just speeds up that whole process and lets everybody understand what is going on a lot more easily and smoothly, thanks to the technology that we've got there. On to the next slide, please. Okay, so just to finish up here, this slide just illustrates really how the three elements, surveillance, modelling and visualisation, tie in together, and also tie into that flow of information that is coming in during the response. So from that initial information about a spill occurring, that might get passed to the modeller in the first instance, who will run an oil spill model, make some initial predictions on what's going on where that oil is going to go, what's going to happen to it, which could get passed to the surveillance team to send their aircraft to the best location, giving them the highest chance of finding that oil. Once they've found that oil and have got an accurate position on where that is, because it's probably not going to be exactly where the modelling said it would be, they can then feed that back to the oil spill modelling team, who can update, refine their predictions accordingly, creating a new model for the surveillance team to work off on the following flight. And so we create this feedback loop between the two, where the two teams are providing each other information to improve what they're doing and ultimately improving the response there. The outcome of both the modelling and the surveillance gets passed on to the visualisation team, who can turn that information into something that is usable and easy to share with the rest of the command, with everybody else involved in the response, letting them know what's going on. Ultimately, that is going to improve the situational awareness of everybody in the room, helping them to give them the information that they need in order to make better decisions about the response and ultimately leading to a successful response. So that wraps us up there. Just go to the next slide, please, Simon. There we go. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending today. It's been really nice to be able to share some of this information with you. If you have got any questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll be sticking around for a bit to answer any of those, but also our emails are on the screen there. If you want to drop us a line separately, then feel free to do so. And just a reminder that the next session in this series is coming up on the 6th of April in the afternoon in the UK, and my colleague Tristan will be talking about in situ burning, which I think will be a really interesting session. So thank you everyone once again, and yeah, let us know if there's any questions.
We have one actually for you, Simon. It was said that previous experiences information is used for the modeling. That means that in less surveyed areas, like some zones in African coasts, the accuracy of the modeling would be less efficient, or is that not necessarily the case?
That's a really good question. So any oil spill modelling is really it's only as good as the input data that we put into it, the currents and the winds, as well as the input data on the spill. To begin with, we for most spills that we respond to, we'll use a global data set for the winds and the currents, which is a sort of, it's non-specialist to any one area. It's a good all-rounder, but it's not sort of highly optimized for any one area. I wouldn't say it's particularly less accurate in let's say some of the African coasts, for example, where there is very complex marine environments, so like lots of little islands, channels, very convoluted coastline. It's somewhere like that, it's going to be less accurate. Where we've got nice straight open coastlines and the water can move quite cleanly across it, that's going to generally give us a much more accurate model. We generally say within about 10 kilometres of the shoreline, we start to sort of reduce the accuracy of the confidence in the predictions that we're getting. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Great. Okay, there's actually another one from another Simon. He's asking, is Shoreline Survey tool available, or is it a tool your operators only have?
At the moment, it's a tool that is primarily for our own sort of teams. It is something that we have in a recent response we've been able to sort of open up to others involved in the response to be able to use. So it's there have been non-ASRL staff have been feeding into it and sort of providing that data. the biggest challenge that we find with a lot of this is around the sort of data management and security, getting all missions set up for the right people to get from different organisations to be able to see the right components of it. So at the moment, it's primarily for us, for OSL sort of stuff to be running and involving, but I think it is certainly something that's on the horizon to be opened up in the future as we're able to.
Great, thanks, Simon. Well, we have run a little bit over the 30 minutes. There were some really great questions, and thank you to you both for all of that. It was a great presentation. If anyone has any further questions for us, they can email either Simon or Simon, and a recording will be sent out to all of you so you can share with your colleagues. And the next session, as we said, is April 6th, and you'll receive the link in your inbox for that one. Thanks everyone for coming, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Mandy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.